Hi there. In this episode, a top 11 list of more older bargain keyboards. This is a follow-up to my episode entitled Older Bargain Keyboards. I said I could make many of these lists, and here's number 2. At number 11 on this list, Sequential Circuits Max. It's a 6-voice polyphonic classic analog synth with 49 full-sized keys. It was produced from 1984 through 1986. It has a 500-note sequencer, but no mod or pitch bend controls. The other controls are 28 buttons and 1 knob. It's a 1 VCO per voice analog synth. On the back panel, you get a power connector that uses an external wall wart power supply. There is a power switch, MIDI in and out, but no MIDI through. There are 2 audio outputs on RCA connectors. There is another audio output on a 1/4-inch jack that is labeled main/headphones. This 1/4-inch jack is TRS and will drive a mono output to an audio amplifier or both channels on a pair of headphones. Sequential had 2 other keyboards similar to this one, being that they were analog synths with built-in sequencers. They were made around the same time, but they were better and more expensive instruments. Sequential created some flexi-disc demos of these instruments and included them in Keyboard Magazine. I remember playing the flexi-discs and being blown away by how cool they sounded. I also remember the name of the composer of the demo discs, John Bowen. He did an incredible job, and I'll bet the demo discs alone helped sell some of these instruments. The Max was the budget version, and it's not very well made. They are hard to find in good working condition. When you turn the Max off, you lose the sequence you created. You can save it via MIDI to a MIDI recorder or a computer. There are 80 ROM sounds and 20 RAM sounds. Unfortunately, you can't edit sounds inside the Max. You have to use the more capable Sequential Circuit 6-track to edit sounds and then send them to the Max over MIDI. That would mean that you could probably do it with a PC, but I don't know if anyone ever created any software. Probably, but I don't know. It's hard to say what a typical price is for the Max. I've seen them for $500 in non-working condition. I've also seen them at that same price in good working condition. I wouldn't recommend buying one, but if you got one really cheap, it could be fun to doodle on. The manual is still available online. It's 23 pages, including the cover. This is a budget classic 80s synth, although not a very good one. I believe that it was intended as an expansion module for the 6-track, although it does have a keyboard. Number 10, Yamaha DX27. After the DX7 came out in 1983, Yamaha leveraged FM into a more affordable line of FM synthesizers. Compared to the DX7 and to save money, you get 4 operators instead of 6 and 8 algorithms instead of 32. But the DX27 is still a very capable synthesizer. There is MIDI in, out, and through on standard 5-pin DIN connectors, a breath controller input, I/O for cassette saving and loading, a foot switch input, phones output, and a mono audio output. Yamaha also made a version with speakers. I guess they were trying to copy the Juno 106S and the HS60. It has a built-in 5-watt amplifier to power the speakers, and it also has a chorus effect. You don't get the chorus effect if you get the non-speaker version. It makes the unit a little over 6 pounds heavier, but at 16.5 pounds for the non-S model and 23.1 pounds for the S model, I wouldn't call them heavy. Compared to a DX7, polyphony is cut in half at 8 notes, but that's still very usable. A big selling point for this synth is the 192 preset patches. It also has 24 user patches, and it does have MIDI system exclusive patch loading and saving. The original DX7 only had 32 RAM patches, but it did have a cartridge slot. These units tend to be reliable. And it's great to have a full 5-octave keyboard on 4-operator FM. Nice condition units sell in the $200 to $300 range. The only downside I see is that you can buy a used original DX7 for a couple of $100s more. For as long as the DX7s continue to go in the $500 price range, these keyboards will only be super attractive to those needing something really inexpensive and they can't stretch the extra couple of $100s. At number 9, Casio CZ101. It's a small 49 full-sized key synthesizer that uses phase distortion to generate sound. If you've never heard the phase distortion, it's not quite FM and it's definitely not analog sounding. You really have to hear it for yourself. It was released in November of 1984. Almost 70,000 units were made, so there's plenty of them out there. You get 8 waveforms and a decent number of buttons to help with editing. It runs off of a 9-volt power supply or internally off of 6 batteries. It has a guitar strap, so you can wear it and run around the stage trading lead lines with the guitarist. I guess I should say guitar strap buttons. You'd have to provide your own guitar strap. On the back panel, you get MIDI in, out on standard 5-pin DIN connectors, plus a cartridge slot. There's no through for MIDI. The other connections are on the right side of the unit and include a DC 9-volt in, a headphone jack, and an audio output on a 1/4-inch connector. It makes sense to me that Casio placed the line out on the right side, since that would be the bottom when you have it strapped on like this. Unfortunately, they didn't put the MIDI output there too. I suppose they're just expecting you to use a wireless audio system and not worry about MIDI. Nice units go in the $400 to $500 range. This is surprising to me because a Casio CZ5000 can be purchased at the same price. It's the same sound generating technology. The 5000 has a 5-octave keyboard, a sequencer, many more controls, and it's just a better machine. On the other hand, you can't really strap it on. Are you really going to strap a CZ5000 to your body and run around the stage? It's pretty heavy. If I remember correctly, this unit was available around the same time as the Korg Poly 800, which will also run on batteries and you can attach a guitar strap. Number 8, Ensoniq Mirage DSK1. It's an 8-bit sampler. I wanted to include at least one sampler in this list. There are several others that came to my mind. One of those is a much better sampling keyboard and more affordable, but I'm saving that one for the next list. In my episode entitled The Most Influential Keyboards to Date, the DSK1/DSK8 Mirage rated fairly high. Producers Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis used an Ensoniq Mirage back in the 80s, and they produced the likes of Janet Jackson, and I think also Human League and a bunch of others. That's a good recommendation for the Mirage. The major downside to the Mirage is that the planet has rotated around the sun a few times since 1984. The Mirage is no longer the amazingly affordable sampler that it was in 1984. There are a lot of ways to get sampling today, even lo-fi 8-bit sampling like the Mirage. It has a 5-octave keyboard. Early models were known for having a horrible keyboard, but later models fixed that. It uses the old 720K floppy disks, and loading takes time. There is a rack mount version of the Mirage. There are floppy disk replacements for the Mirage made by a couple of different companies. This allows you to connect a thumb drive with tons of sounds available on the thumb. As far as I know, it works on the DSK1 and the rack mount unit. If you're adventurous and wanted to purchase one and hardwire it inside the Mirage keyboard or fab it in some other way, it might be possible to put it on the DSK8, which has the disk drive under the front of the keyboard. And from what I understand, there's not enough room to actually fit one of these drive replacements in there. My jaw dropped when I first heard the Mirage piano sound in 1984. Nice units go in the $500 to $1,000 range, which is expensive for an 8-bit sampler, but it's part of keyboard history, and that's why it makes the list and why people charge a little extra for it. Number 7, Yamaha DX100. This is a 4-operator FM synth with 4 octaves of mini keys. I think this is one of the cutest little synthesizers in the world, even though I'm not a fan of mini keys. Like the Casio CZ101 and Korg Poly 800, it has guitar strap buttons. It also has both mod and pitch bend wheels ready for portable play. They are positioned on the rear panel at the top towards the left edge, which makes sense if you were wearing the unit. So if I was wearing the unit, they'd be up here. There are 32 buttons and 2 sliders, which is generous for the time period and the size of the unit. One slider is for volume and the other is for data entry. That's the same way it is on the DX7. The display is only one line of 16 characters and it's LCD. That's unfortunate. There are replacement LED screens that rock, but they are probably not plug and play and it would take a little bit to put them in. The unit will run on batteries like the CZ101 and the Poly 800. It takes 6 C-size batteries. Remember, they would quote times of play like 2 or 4 hours. That was old battery technology. Now we have lithium ion. So lithium ion, if I could say it correctly, will make battery life a lot longer. It's got very similar specs as the DX27 as far as the internals are concerned. 8 algorithms, 192 preset patches, 24 RAM patches, 8-note polyphony. On the back you get MIDI in, out, and through on standard 5-pin DIN connectors, a tape interface for loading and saving patches, a display contrast control, which is nice, and a breath controller input. Also a foot switch input, a headphone jack, a mono audio output, a power jack for an external power supply, and a power switch. That's a lot on this small device. It has guitar strap studs, like I think I said already, so you can play Rockstar in your bedroom or on stage at Madison Square Garden, depending on where you've been hired to play. Prices vary greatly from $250 to over $700. I think $250 is reasonable. Personally, I wouldn't pay more than that. Number 6, Oberheim Matrix 1000. This is a single rack space unit with 1000 analog sounds. This unit made it onto my top 11 list of overhyped keyboards. The reason is that you can't edit it from the front panel and it's expensive. You need to own an Oberheim Matrix 6 in order to edit sounds, or you can use a free PC or Mac software program. Some people still argue that it's a good value, and while I don't agree with that, I'm including it. You get the Oberheim punchy sound, but you're paying for it. The front panel has 15 buttons, a volume knob, and a power switch. The display is a 3-character LED. It's not exactly Christmas. The rear panel has a mono audio output, MIDI in, out, and through on standard 5-pin DIN connectors, and an IEC power connector. Nice units go in the $850 to $1,700 range. I still think they are overpriced, but you can decide and you can yap at me in the comments. Even on the low end of $850, you can buy a lot of software for that price. And this is one time that folks can't argue it's not the same experience, meaning editing experience of a classic analog synthesizer with one control per function, because this unit doesn't have that. It's just a box of a lot of analog sounds, just like a plug-in in a PC. In my opinion, there are some classic synths in this price range that are a much better value, like the Juno 106, the DW8000, the Akai AX80, and the Poly 6, to name but a few. I know I rag on the Juno 106 a lot, but it's still a better value than the Matrix 1000. At number 5, Sequential Circuits Multitrack. It's a 6-voice analog multi-timbral synthesizer with a built-in 6-track sequencer. The voice architecture for the synthesizer is 1 VCO per voice. You get a low-pass filter, an LFO, an amplifier, and 3 envelopes. 1 envelope for the VCO, 1 for the filter, and 1 for the amplifier. That's pretty generous on the envelopes, but not very generous on the oscillators. With only 1 VCO per voice, sonically, it's not very deep. Even with the Juno 106, you get an oscillator and a sub per voice. Fortunately, Sequential made the most of it, and the sound is pretty good. There's also an onboard chorus, which helps a lot. Listening to the Flexi Disc can be impressive. I do recall playing one and I thought it sounded kind of flat, but that might just be me. With its basic voice architecture, you really need the chorus. A Juno 106 sounds a lot better, but they are usually more expensive than the 6-track, so that makes sense. The going price is $600 to $800, and you're not going to get a Juno 106 for that price. I think that some folks may think they are getting a cheap Sequential Circuit 600, but the 600 has a better voice architecture. Moving on. At number 4, Ensoniq SQ80. Many people refer to this keyboard as an updated ESQ1, but it's a lot more than that. It has the same 5-octave keyboard with velocity sensitivity as the ESQ1, but it also has polyphonic aftertouch. You can set a programmable split point, and you can layer on either side of the split, or on both. There's also polyphonic glide and fingered monoglide. It has 8 voices with 3 oscillators per voice using digital wavetable synthesis. It has an 8-track sequencer and a floppy disk drive for saving data. It can play internal voices and external MIDI devices at the same time, and I'm talking about from the sequencer. Internal storage is 20,000 notes with up to 20 songs. That's pretty generous for the time. The double-sided 3.5-inch micro floppy will store sequences, patches, and MIDI dumps from external MIDI devices, as long as they don't exceed 64K, and most don't. The star of the front panel is the 80-character fluoro display, which is 40 characters by 2 lines, and it just looks amazing. They put it on a lot of other instruments, not just the ESQ1 and the SQ80. There are 51 buttons and 2 sliders, 1 slider for volume and 1 slider for data entry. 10 buttons are soft buttons, meaning they correspond to information in the display, and it certainly makes editing faster. Also on the front panel are the mod and pitch bend wheels, the disk drive, and a cartridge slot. The back panel is well appointed too. It has a power switch and a standard IEC power cable. There is also MIDI in, out, and through on standard 5-pin DINs, left and right audio outputs, a headphone jack, a sustain foot switch, sequencer foot switch, and that will allow you to stop and start recording and also start playback and stop playback, a tape out and a tape in for saving your sound data, and a pedal/CV input. The pedal/CV input could be used to create pitch bend when both your hands are busy, say in a live situation, but it's also able to target other parameters in the machine. Prices are all over the place for this keyboard. You'll see generally these keyboards listed in the $700 to $900 price range, but you'll also see people selling them for $2,000. They are great keyboards, but they're not $2,000 great. $700 is a fair price and about right for this keyboard. I've even seen them in the 500s, but the cosmetic condition was poor. You're paying for some features here that are cute, but you probably won't use, like the sequencer and the ability to store dump files from other devices. Now, this is true on a lot of older tech. At least one company makes an aftermarket thumb drive, and you can use this to replace the floppy drive that's in the unit, and it costs about $90. Interestingly, these drives don't speed up the load times very much. And that's true of a lot of these older machines because the bus was basically matched to the speed of the floppy, and so it doesn't matter how fast of a device you put that's a storage device, it can only go as fast as the pipe will allow. Obviously, thumb drives are more reliable, they're silent with no moving parts, and they give you massive amounts of storage, so that's a big positive right there. This unit came out circa 1987 and was competing with the D50 in 1987. A year later, it was competing with the M1. A lot of people love this synth, and there's a lot to love about it. Wavetable synthesis like this with 3 oscillators per voice is way cool. If it had come out in 1985, it would have sold a ton. At least I think it would have. By 1987, it was a little late to the party. At number 3, Sequential Circuit 6-track. This is the third sequential unit on this list. I could have spread them out across a couple of lists, but to me, it makes sense to put them all together in the same list. They are all analog synths with a built-in sequencer. This way you can compare them. In my opinion, this is the best of the bunch. The architecture is 1 oscillator per voice with 35 total parameters, and about 32 of those are actually dedicated towards sound generation and the tone of the machine. The synth parameters are editable from the front panel through tedious parameter entry. On the front panel, you get 28 buttons, 5 knobs, a 2-digit LED, a mod wheel, and a pitch bend wheel. The keyboard is 4 octaves and is not velocity sensitive. The rear panel is sparse with MIDI in and out, a TRS audio out that can also drive headphones, and a foot switch that can start and stop recording as well as playback. The sequencer capacity is 800 notes. That's laughable by today's standards, but pretty good for that time period. This unit has a more classic synthesizer look, as you can see from the picture. The wood end caps really help that. Good condition units range from about $800 to about $1,300. I've seen them for somewhat less than that. I've seen them as low as $600, but usually they're not in very good condition. None of the sequential units in this list, the Max, the Multitrack, or the 6-track, are what I would call reliable. They are certainly a step up from EDP, Electronic Dream Plant, but that's not saying much. And they're a big step up from that. But from people I've known that have owned them, the 6-track and the Multitrack are somewhat reliable. And the Max is, dare I say it, a lemon. I know I'm going to hear about that, right? Keep that in mind before you spend your money. At number 2, Yamaha DX21. Similar to Sequential, this is the third synth from Yamaha in this list. Unlike the Sequential products, these are actually pretty reliable. It's another 4-operator FM synthesizer with 8 algorithms. On the front panel, you get 42 buttons, 3 sliders, and a 16-character by 2-line LCD. 1 slider is for volume, 1 slider is for balance, since the keyboard can be split and layered, and 1 slider is for data entry. You get a 5-octave velocity-sensitive keyboard and good rear panel connectivity that includes a breath controller input, headphone output, a left and right audio output, volume pedal input, sustain pedal input, and a portamento on-off pedal input. There is MIDI in, out, and through on standard 5-pin DINs, a cassette I/O port for patch saving and loading, a permanently attached power cable, and a power switch. A lot of Yamaha synths came with a music stand that attaches to holes on the rear panel. A lot of people that have never owned a DX don't know this, and it applies to this unit and the DX27. It also applies to the original DX7 and my DX7 2FD. I've never seen anyone use the stand, but the mounting holes are there. There are 128 preset patches in ROM, 32 RAM patch memories to which you can save your own creations, and 32 performance memories for saving the splits and layers. And there's about 5 of those splits and layers when you're in the splits and layers mode. The music stand and the cassette cable came as accessories with a new unit. You're unlikely to get these accessories when you purchase used, but you might get lucky. The unit does have fairly robust MIDI with system exclusive implementation, so that's a better way to load and save patches. Also, the manual has detailed sysx info if you have a MIDI librarian or if you want to experiment. Prices for a unit in good condition range from about $200 to $400. You may know that during this time period, Yamaha gave their better keyboards lower numbers. For instance, in the 6-operator line, you'd have the DX1 on top, then the DX5, then the DX7, then the DX9. And I'm not talking about modules. I'm only talking about keyboards, and I'm not talking about special editions. The DX27 is not as good as the DX21 for several reasons, yet you'll see them offered in the similar price range. If you go looking to buy, the DX21 is the better unit. At number 1, Roland JX3P. This is a classic 80s 6-voice polyphonic analog synthesizer with a 61-note non-velocity sensing keyboard. The reason why I have it rated at the number 1 spot is that I've seen them as low as $500, and that's recently. Admittedly, you usually see them in the $700 to $1,100 range. A lot of times when they are in the $500 range, it's because they are gray market models. Gray market means that when they were originally purchased, they weren't intended for the country that they were shipped to. It means that the person got them without a warranty, and they probably had to use a power converter with them. I'm not sure if Roland had adopted the use of their popular linear power supply labeled Bando when the JX3P came out. Those power supplies use multi-taps, and they're used in many models, including the Juno 106. If so, like I said, you could take those multi-taps and it would be trivial to resolder the tap to use for United States voltages, or any other country for that matter. I'm a fan of a lot of Roland tech. I own at least half a dozen pieces of Roland gear, but I'm not a fan of the JX3P. Yet I still made it number 1. It was made from 1983 through 1985, and to me, it seems like a filler synth. By that I mean it filled the hole as an affordable synth between the release of the Juno 60 and then the release of the Juno 106. Basic specs are 2 DCOs per voice, an LFO, a filter, and 1 ADSR. It has a chorus effect, 32 preset patches, and 32 user patches. It has basic MIDI, a 128-note step sequencer, and some cross-mod functionality. The Roland MKS30 is a very similar rack-mount version of this synth, with a few differences. It sounds pretty good. I just never cared for the look of it, and it has other problems. Here's why you can get them for cheap. The big downer is that although you can program this instrument from the front panel, it's tedious parameter entry, and there's no display. It has 33 buttons that light up to give you feedback, but no display. That's crazy. Now you can purchase a PG200 programmer to get a more classic experience of control with knobs and switches, and now you're adding, unfortunately, another $500 to $800 to the price, if you can find one of those units. There are probably some software editors out there. I wouldn't be surprised. That's it for this episode. Hopefully I haven't wasted your time. Take care, and I'll be back in another episode soon.